Oh, hey, sorry about that. Welcome to Pixel Hunt. This is a YouTube channel where I talk about photography and filmmaking. My name is Samiran Rao, and welcome to this editing tutorial video where we're going to take this photo and make it look like this. Hey, so here's the deal. I have an Instagram account, that's the one, and I've been recently uploading a lot of photos there, and I started getting a lot of DMs from users on Instagram about how I edit my pictures, and they've been requesting tutorials, so I thought I'd just make editing tutorials on YouTube. So here we go. Alright, so I don't want this YouTube channel to be just about editing tutorials. I want it to be everything to do with photography and filmmaking. So in that sense, I want to talk about how I captured this image before I go into how I'm going to edit the image. So first of all, I want to talk about the camera I used, the lens I used, and the settings that I used. So I used this Canon 6D Mark II to capture this image. Now the Canon 6D Mark II doesn't have a great dynamic range, which basically means I cannot capture the shadows and the highlights in the same image. So what I did was I used bracketing for this, which I'll explain in a moment. The lens I used for this image was the 85mm prime Canon f1.4, and my settings were shutter speed 1/640, aperture f5.6, and ISO 50. When I say I use bracketing, it means that instead of capturing one image when I click the shutter button, my camera captures 3 images, and the 3 images are at different exposures. I set my exposure settings to capture the midtones correctly, but I know that I cannot capture the highlights and the shadows in that image. So what the camera does is it adjusts the settings so that it captures 3 images instead of one. One of them would be the one that I capture. The other one would be one stop lesser, that is one stop darker, that is half the brightness. And the other one would be one stop brighter, which is like double the brightness. What happens here is the brighter image captures all the shadows and the darker image captures all the highlights, whereas my settings is good enough to capture the midtones. And then we can go in post and merge these images into one where we have all the details. So I'm going to be using Lightroom to edit this image. The first thing I'll do is merge these 3 images into one. I'll just select the 3 images, right click, and merge them into one single image. So this is the HDR image that was merged from the 3 images. You can see that the highlights and the shadows are properly visible here. The shadows are still a little bit dark, so that's the first thing we'll be adjusting with the basic corrections. So with the basic corrections, the only thing I want to do is add a little bit of a warmer tone to the image. So I'm going to increase the temperature a little bit, and then I'm also going to increase the shadows. The next thing I want to do is I'll grab an adjustment brush and paint over the subject of the image, which is basically me. And what I want to do with this is bring up the shadows a little bit more. So the next thing I'll do is grab a graduated filter and drag it from the top of the image. I want to decrease the exposure of the top portion just a little bit, but I also want to make sure that this only affects the bright areas in the top portion of the image, that is the sky of the image, and it doesn't affect the branches of the image. So what I'm going to do is I'll grab a range mask here, and I'm going to select the sky portion so that it only affects that bright area of the sky and not the branches here. Okay, at this point I'm still feeling that the remaining part of the sky is still pretty bright. It's almost white in some of the areas. So I'm going to grab an adjustment brush and paint over the rest of the sky, and I'm going to bring down the exposure there as well. Now again, in this case, I only want to affect the sky and not the remaining areas that are going to be painted upon. So what I'll do is I'll use a color range mask this time, not a luminance one. I'm going to select this bluish sky color so that only that gets affected. I'll bring down the exposure just a tiny bit and also increase the saturation and dehaze this area a little bit. Okay, now it's starting to look a little better. The next thing I want to do is shift the sky blue slightly towards a teal blue color, not completely, but just a little bit. And then take a quick look at the before and after. So that's quite a change that we've made. Okay, the next thing I see is that the greenery on the hills seems a little too saturated for my liking. So I'm going to reduce the yellows a little bit there so that it becomes slightly desaturated. And then I'm going to select the adjustment filter that we created over the subject, and I'm going to increase the saturation over the subject a little bit. So the background is getting a little desaturated and the foreground, that subject, is getting a little bit more saturated. And I'm also going to reduce the temperature of the subject a little bit, just to give it a slightly cooler tone so that it separates from the warm background a little bit more. Okay, what I see here is that the sky on the left side is not as dark as the sky on the right side. It seems like that's the case in the original image itself. So what I have to do is add another adjustment brush, adjustment filter, and decrease the brightness of the sky on the left slightly more than the sky on the right. Alright, so I like how it's looking right now. The next thing I want to do is crop it for an Instagram post. So this whole picture is not the ratio that an Instagram post is supposed to be. So we're going to crop it to 4:5. That's also one of the reasons why I went a little bit lower with the graduated filter, because I knew that I want to get rid of the top portion when I crop it. I like the bottom portion because it has a sense of depth there with the blurry foreground and the subject slowly coming into focus. So I'm going to keep that and crop out the top portion. Now that is how it's going to look on an Instagram post. The only other thing I want to do is bring down the graduated filter that we had slightly lower, because I don't see that it's really affecting the top portion after the crop. So I'm going to bring it as slightly lower in this image. One more thing I want to do is just play around a little bit with the tone curve here, just to add a slight bit of contrast. I don't want to do a full-on S curve here because it's already a pretty contrasty image, but I just want to see if I can just add a slight bit more contrast without it looking unnatural. And the last thing I want to do is add a slight bit of vignette here. And once I've added the vignette, I notice that the graduated filter on the top is actually not necessary. So I'm going to push it up a little bit like it was before, and there you go. That should be the final image. Alright, that's it for the first editing tutorial on this channel. If you like the video, click on the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, share it with all your friends, all that good stuff. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Oh.